All right, let's take a look at winners and losers presented by Discover. This is the Ovi and Sid edition. Wish, kick us off.
I mean, is there a bigger winner than Gary Bettman? I don't know. Like this guy oversaw a canceled NHL season. It was a dark time for hockey. There was no goal scoring. There was no buzz for the league. As mentioned before, there are other factors that led to the resurgence of the NHL, but one of them is definitely latching on to the biggest interpersonal rivalry the league had seen since Mario and Wayne Gretzky. And the Sid and Ovi thing revitalized the Caps and Penguins rivalry. That became a big moneymaker. They used to put those games on Super Bowl Sunday. Arda, remember that? And the having Ovechkin and Sid be the faces of the league for the next 25 years made Gary Bettman's life a little bit easier.
I think we can generalize this loser. It's every general manager that missed out on Sid and Ovi, especially if you lost the draft lottery. But in particular, Brian Berkwish. Why?
Oh yeah, he was the GM of the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim at that point, and he has said in the past he was convinced that the Ducks were going to end up with Crosby because they were in the final two picks. Instead, they get the second overall pick. They draft Bobby Ryan, a very good player during his career, but not Sidney Crosby. And to this day, Brian Burke laments what could have been. And can you imagine Sidney Crosby joining the Mighty Ducks team, by the way? If you go back and look at what they were in 2005, 2006, obviously
Oh
they win the
my.
cup a few years later, or a year later after that. But I mean, you're talking about a young Corey Perry, a young Ryan Getzlaff, Solani's in the roster, Pronger, Niedermeyer's, Jaguar in goal. Like that Sid plus Mighty Ducks team might have won three cups of their own in the next like 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, that would have been disgusting. Speaking of winning multiple cups, a winner is Brooks Orpik because he falls in rarefied air as an NHL player that has won a Stanley Cup with both Alex Ovechkin and Sidney Crosby.
Why not, right? Like there's a few guys that have played on both teams, but I think the most prominent one is probably Brooks Orpik, who won a cup with Sid in 2009, the first cup that the Penguins win in the Crosby era, and then is a part of that Capitals team that wins a dozen years later, several years later. And so Brooks Orpik, the beneficiary of having played with both Sid and Ovi in his career.
I'll take a loser here. It To me, it's all the stars who would have been elevated in the minds of hockey fans or even sports fans if not for Ovi and Sid, because they were taking up all of the rarefied air at the top of the mountain in the minds of hockey fans and sports fans. So, unfortunately, if you're like a Steven Stamkos or an elite player, you're not getting the same level of love because that love is being reserved for all-timer players that are playing with you on the same sheets of ice, Ovi and Sid.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's tough to break through when you have one guy winning every goal scoring title and between them win a bunch of MVPs. Great for players that are looking for guys to emulate, not so great for players that are looking to have their own star shine. Finally, winner for me, Arda, the concept of generational talents. We throw this word around a lot as sports fans and sports media, but when you can see it, when you can touch it, when you can watch it in players like Sidney Crosby and Alex Ovechkin, two guys that will be talked about 30 years from now in the same way that we talk about Gretzky and Lemieux and Gordie Howe and Bobby Orr. Like that's what a generational talent looks like. It's nice to have that in sharp relief. So when we throw it on, Gavin McKenna, we'll understand what it means to throw that label around because Sidney Crosby and Alex Ovechkin were in fact generational talents. And guess what? They were in the same generation, which makes it all the better that we had this rivalry happening over the last few decades.
Big, big shoes to fill. I'll give a quick final thought here, and then I'll ask you for yours, Wish. Obviously, the generation will live, the rivalry will live on, like you said. Sidney Crosby, even though you mentioned it earlier in the show, he wasn't the greatest soundbite for his personal brand per se early in his career. He has become that later in his career. He really is the true spokesperson for the game of hockey. And Alex Ovechkin makes me believe that I can continue to drink soft drinks and be an elite person. But for you, somebody who covered this rivalry in its entirety, you spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C. a final thought on Ovi versus Sid.
I mean, let's talk about the franchises themselves and where they were. I mean, the Penguins were a team where relocation was being bandied about before Crosby and Malkin and Fleury and Letang all arrived. In Washington, that was a moribund franchise that nobody really cared about in the market because of how bad they had been leading up to drafting Ovechkin. Ovechkin, like you said, I saw it myself. The Rock the Red era, the Young Guns era, the revitalization of that franchise to grow it into becoming arguably the most important team in DC for a good stretch of time there. The way that they impacted their own teams, I think, mirrors the way that they helped create the conditions to make the NHL more successful.